World War II veterans here who are going to tell us epic stories. Stories that were remarkable and heroic and were part of winning the war back in the 1940s. John Billings, from my immediate left, was a U.S. Army Air Force's B-24 pilot who flew bombing missions out of Italy, but more significantly, and this is a part of the war I had not heard about yet, more significantly flew secret missions for the OSS, inserting teams behind enemy lines. Next to him is Chief Matt Gutman, who piloted another kind of vessel. He piloted landing craft as a Coxswain. He carried combat Marines and supplies to the beaches of the islands that saw some of the toughest fighting in the Pacific. We're going to start off talking to John. John, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Great to have you here. We just met this morning.
Yeah.
John, can you tell me why you got into aviation in the U.S. Army and how all that happened? When were you introduced to aviation?
I was introduced to aviation by virtue of a birthday present from my father. He went by a little local grass field and there was a sign out front saying, "Air rides here." So we bought 2 tickets and it probably was only 10 minutes long, but to a 3-year-older, it seemed like all afternoon. But anyway, it crawled under my skin and it hasn't come out yet.
Let me ask you a question. You started at 3-year-old. How old are you today?
98.
When was the last time you flew an airplane?
Tuesday.
Okay. Okay. So tell us about how you enlisted into the Army. And what...
The government sent out cards which you were supposed to fill out and bring to the post office, the local post office. They called it the draft. It didn't take a scientific brain to see that that was just absolutely no local control. So I decided that I would go down and enlist and volunteer for the Air. And I went into the enlistment office in Boston and told him I wanted to fly. And he said, "Absolutely, you're going to be perfect for it. Sign here." So I did.
And when you did go in, where did they ship you off to for your training?
Well, the training was scattered around the country from from the Atlantic coast to upper New York State to a lot in Texas and Kansas and South Carolina.
And you told me earlier it took a while for you to actually get inside of an airplane. Is that correct?
Yes, it was over a year in training before I got my hands on an airplane.
And what kind of plane was that?
It was a Fairchild single engine, of course, no electricity on board whatsoever, and it had a starter. It did if you could signal the other cadet on the ground to come over and crank it up. But it was very, very basic, and we learned the basics of all things. Very, very well. We were 3 months doing that.
I think you told me earlier today the first time you saw a B-24 was on Long Island. Is that correct?
No. It was in Liberal, Kansas. I had filled out the paper that they wanted me to fill out, including the address that I was going to be at when they going to ship the orders to me. So, and on that paper was a place where you could fill in and say what kind of an airplane you wanted to fly in combat. And I said A-20 or 26. They were very, very similar. And the man handling all this, he said, I've looked over these requests, and I don't see that any of you would be disappointed. So I went off for a 30-day leave. Coming back, I was on the bus from the railroad station to the airport in Liberal, Kansas, and I was staring out over the field looking for the A-20 or 26. They're very, very similar. And all I could see was these big, ugly things. And that's all there was there. So much for my...
And those big ugly things are B-24s, I imagine.
B-24s, yeah.
Okay, well, let's leap forward. Let's leap across the Atlantic Ocean. You've been trained on your B-24. Eventually, I think you went to England?
No, Italy.
Italy?
Yep.
You told me you stopped in England and you visited the pubs.
Oh, no, that was long afterwards.
Oh, okay. Okay, you're in Italy. And what kind of missions were you flying in Italy?
At first, I was flying bombing missions. I completed 14 bombing missions, and I lost 4 of my crew members, not from my airplane, but when they were flying with somebody else, which meant that I was no longer able to muster a 10-man crew. So they sent me down to a place called OSS, and I asked my colonel, what do they do at the OSS? And the colonel said, you'll find out.
Well, those were the top secret missions that you were on.
Yes.
Would you explain to us and talk to the folks here about what a typical mission was like on one of these top secret
they
missions?
were at least 2/3 of them were just supply missions, where they would put materiel in a container, put a parachute on it, and hang it in the bomb bay. And we'd go out to a certain spot and look for a code, flashlight given, and if so, then we'd make a run and drop it out on them. Now, the rest of the missions were with people, and they were a little bit different. We were not quite so low, just to give them some extra time to get down, so forth. And we would, as usual, go out and get in the airplane and start up all the engines, check everything out, taxi out to the end of the runway and wait. And in due time, a little panel truck would come out and 1 or more people would get out, get in the bomb bay and turn aft. We, that is the front crew, would never see them, not at all. But this particular mission...
You want to talk about Operation Greenup?
That's what you want.
Let's talk about it.
Yes. When we were maybe 2 hours out, my radio operator said, I got a coded message, and it says, if no result, do not come back home. So orders will follow. Well, we got up there in the mountains where we were supposed to deliver this team, and it was just totally clouded in. And so we started back, and the radio operator gave us the coordinates of an airport to stay in overnight. That was Rosignano, which is up in the west, kind of northwest of Italy on the Mediterranean side. We, of course, went to bed, And due time, we got up and went to chow line, and there was our Joes.
The
That's
Joes
what-
being
That's the name of every person that we were carrying was Joe, because we didn't need to know their name. So we didn't know their name. And one of them was wearing German uniform and speaking German. Actually, German with an Austrian accent. And the other two looked like aviators, but they actually weren't. But we introduced ourselves in the Chaiwan and got to talking, and of course, very carefully, not letting on who we were and all that. My bombardier was second generation German, and he spoke German to one of them, and he told me, I'm practicing German. Well, it so happened long after, that's how we got in touch with Fred. They were exchanging their hometown addresses. at
But
that
you
time.
eventually inserted those guys, is that correct?
Yes, it took 5 days. Now, Fred was a good talker. He was telling us all about how all of the different airplanes that he flew and so forth. And so on the third day, the P-38 camera airplane came back and said, no way, it's just all up in the mountains. So we didn't even try, and my navigator, who was very precise, every chance he got, he would want to calibrate his instruments, and he found out that we weren't going to go anywhere, and he says, how about a airspeed calibration run today? I said, okay. And I said to Fred, I said, you want to come on and sit in a co-pilot seat? He says, yeah. And and we finished the run, and then I said, Fred, do you want to fly? Yeah. So he came across the harbor in Rosignano at sailboat height, sailboat mast height, and then flew up to the cut in the mountain and did an Immelman that would bring Immelman out of his grave. It was so good. So I figured, oh, that's nice. He's been such a good pilot, you know. And then Fred said after the Immelman, he says, oh, that's enough. And and we went back and landed. Well, jumping forward on the fifth night, we got up there, and again, it was just totally clouded up. We could have let them out because we knew we were there, but we didn't know exactly what it looked like. So I said no. And my navigator and the team leader, Fred, had studied the maps, and they had a secondary point. So I said, okay, let's go to the secondary point. Well, I didn't know it was at a lower level on the north side of the mountain. So I cleared the rim of the top of the mountain, which is at 13,000 feet, and then took the power off and started down. We went down, and it was going down fast, fast, fast. Then I remembered the briefing that said that the winds in the Alps was going to be over 200 miles an hour in places, which, when it came over the top of the ridge, descended taking us down at a tremendous rate. So I put the power back up to normal. That wasn't enough. So I put the power up to takeoff power. That wasn't enough. I put it up to war emergency power. That wasn't enough. So I released the latch and turned the turbo control to maximum turbo RPM, which drove the manifold pressure gauge off of the scale, and don't know what kind of power that was, but it seemed to slow us down. But it probably wasn't that, because we're at the bottom of the valley. And so I started going back and forth, round. And at one time, my bombardier who occupied the front turret, he was the leading edge of the airplane. And he says, "Turn, John, turn." So I did. And it took us 23 minutes to get back up to 13,000 feet. And my navigator, who I've already said was a nitpicker, he had put down to the second when I closed the throttles, and to the second when we let stop going down, and that was 18 seconds that we lost 6,000 feet.
I'm going to stop you there because we got to give Matt here an
Okay.
opportunity. But you inserted the crew, the team.
Yep.
They helped secure the Brenner Pass, and it was one of the most important missions of World War II, as I recall.
Yes, and Fred, even after he was tortured, even in the 60s, when he took his shirt off, you could see railroad track map on his back. Still.
Interesting. Matt,
Yes, sir.
you enlisted in the United States Navy.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
I don't want to be in the Army or the Marines.
Okay. Well, explain that, please.
Well, first of all, two of my brothers before World War II, one was the Army and one was in the Navy. And I sort of favored him, because I was younger than him, to go in the Navy. And that happened because when I was in school, when they bombed Pearl Harbor, I was 16 years old in high school. When I turned 18, naturally the draft was on. So either you were drafted or you enlisted. Since I didn't want to be in the Army and Navy, I went down to the recruiting office of the Navy, and I enlisted for 6 years, just to avoid being drafted in the Army. And that's how I got in the Navy.
Okay. Well, how did you become a coxswain?
Well,
Let me
actually-
read something first. I did some research.
Yeah, go ahead.
The coxswain is an enlisted sailor who has actual physical control of an open boat small enough to be carried aboard another vessel.
That's correct.
Today in the U.S. Navy, coxswains play a vital role in naval special warfare community. And I know in World War II, they were also vital to island fighting in the Pacific. So how did you get to be a coxswain?
Well, first of all, when you first go in the Navy, you're a recruit. You're 2 or 3 levels up when you are a seaman first class. The 3rd level up, you are in the deck force, and if you know how to operate boats and everything on the main deck, you are a coxswain. And that means that you are capable of operating a landing craft. And that's the way you become a coxswain. Anybody that lands or operates a boat is called a coxswain.
Well, did you have any prior?
I had training at Camp Bradford, Virginia for amphibious training, and that's where they taught me how to operate that boat.
But a kid, you never operated a boat.
No, hell. I never seen the ocean until I got in the Navy. My parents couldn't take me there. We were a poor family.
So,
Anyway,
go ahead.
that was what. Now, and that's the way I got in the Navy. I wanted that.
Well, talk about getting shipped out to the Pacific. Did you?
Oh, that was, well, first of all, in boot camp, when you're finished, they give you 3 choices what you want to be. Go to school to learn a different trade, this or that. And what I did, the whole three choices, sea duty, sea duty, sea duty. I wanted to get out there and fight right away. And boy, did they give me sea duty right away.
Where did they send you? Where's the first place you went?
Yeah, well, they sent me then up to Evansville, Indiana, to pick up our first ship, where the ship was being built. And it was an amphibious ship. It was called LST 553. That meant landing ship tank. But you know what we called it in the Navy?
Huh.
Low, slow target. Because it only went 8 knots. It's standard speed. That's about 10 miles an hour. Hell, I can run faster than that. That's why we call low, slow targets.
Yeah.
Anyway, that ship was built primarily to invade an island with troops and tanks. That tank deck held 20 Sherman tanks and Marines or soldiers up to 250. They were the invading force. And that's what that LST was, to invade an island with troops and tanks.
Well, how many of those can you get on a boat like you had, a landing craft?
I carried 35 combat Marines on there and 4 of us sailors.
Talk about
The boat was 35 foot long and 12 foot wide, enough to carry them men. And I'm up there, I see where I'm going. These other Marines, they're sort of hunkered down, you know? And I had to see where I'm going.
But you were a pretty good target too, right?
And you know what? I never got wounded.
Huh. Well, talk about your first landing.
The first landing was at Peleliu. That was the toughest landing that I had, and I'll tell you why. Peleliu was an island about 6 miles long and 2 miles wide. It was important for us to invade that little island in the Palau groups because the Japanese had an airstrip. And we wanted that to jump ahead, you know, get closer to Japan. Well, the higher-ups said that we could conquer that land within 3 days. They were wrong. It took us 24 days to conquer that little island because the Japanese were all in their tunnels. That whole island was full of tunnels and caves. And all islands from there on were in tunnels. And finally, we conquered that in 24 days.
How many landings did you make during the course of that battle?
I made 6 landings within 2 years. From 1944, that's when I made my first at Peleliu. Then I made 4 landings in the Philippines, Leyte, Mindoro, Lingayen Gulf, and Subic Bay. And then finally Okinawa. Now, when we invaded Leyte, that's where we experienced the first kamikaze pilots diving on our ships. It started there at Leyte, and it continued all through the Philippines, and Okinawa was the worst. Anyway, that's what it was.
Could you see them coming?
Oh, yeah, we shot down 3 of them. Oh, they never hit our ship. They got very close, but our firepower stopped them. We had 10, 20 millimeter guns. They're anti-aircraft guns, and 3 quad 40 millimeter guns. We only had guns on that ship for aircraft. The biggest gun we had was on the stern of the ship, and that was a 3-inch 50. We very seldom ever used that because we never encountered any submarines that would surface to fight them, you know? And once the ship landed, we couldn't use that. That was on the stern.
So your landing craft were not armed at all, I assume.
Pardon me?
Your landing craft were not armed. I mean, there was no way for you to defend yourself?
Well, in the back of my landing craft, there was a place where they could mount 2 30 caliber machine guns. They never did. We never had them because what good is it when I landed that boat, I made sure we went full speed so that we could dig up in the sand, the bow, so that the next wave wouldn't broach your boat Because once your boat's broached sideways, the next wave would keep you from turning. You can't turn that into sand. Then you're finished. You're finished.
Did you also do extractions from the island as well?
Yeah. Well, when I landed my boat, and then all the Marines got off, I took a lot of the wounded, seriously wounded, out to hospital ships and back with more supplies. Well, in order for me to retract, I had to wait till the next wave came in. The wave lifted the stern of my boat up, and then I gunned it in reverse to quickly go in reverse and turn around before the next wave would come in. And that was it.
I was talking to John earlier
Yes.
about looking back and how fortunate both of you gentlemen are that you're here to talk to us today.
Yes.
And I'm sure you look back as well and have
Oh,
that same
yes,
feeling.
it brings back memories, especially when I see some of the movies and I see these landings and, the firepower. It brings back a lot of memories.
And you, John, do you have memories of the missions you flew?
Yes.
One in particular other than Greenup?
Actually, I do have reruns of the time that the airplane was right here, side of me, blew up. That was I was staring at him because, of course, when you're flying formation, you got to look at him, otherwise you're going to hit him. And he just dissolved into a terrible flash. And I say he, all 10 men.
A crew of 10 went down.